everyone, and welcome to the AAG Podcast. I'm so glad that you all have tuned in today. My name is John Martin. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the Director of Education at the Addiction Alliance of Georgia. Very excited today to introduce our guest. His name is Frank Boykin. Frank retired in 2021 as the Chief Financial Officer at Mohawk Industries, where he served for 28 years. He was the CFO of the Year in 2010 and won a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Atlanta Business Chronicle. Frank also serves as the chair of the Georgia State University Foundation. He is the co-founder of the Addiction Alliance of Georgia and member of the Oversight Committee. Frank also has a compelling personal story as a family member of a loved one with an opioid use disorder. He is here today to talk to us about his experience and how that inspired advocacy work in the field of addiction treatment. Please welcome Frank Boykin.
There he is.
Hey, John. Sorry about being late.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
Oh, better than you, or better than you were, sounds like.
Yes. Well, I have two little kids, so
Yeah.
things just kind of cycle in and out of my home.
Yeah.
And the worst is the stomach bug. I have
Oh,
to say.
wow.
But we did
That-
not have the stomach bug this last time, so that was good. It was more just kind of a viral upper
Yeah.
respiratory thing, but
Yeah. Was it the flu or was it COVID? Do you know?
no, I don't think so. It was just a strange, long, like it lasted about 2 weeks, but it was minor.
Yeah.
But I lost my voice, and I don't normally lose my voice, but I totally lost my voice.
Yeah.
But it's back now, and I'm ready to roll.
Well, good. You look pretty good.
Well, thank you, thank you. How was your Thanksgiving?
My Thanksgiving was great. We went out to San Diego to see our son. So we swap back and forth. Our daughter goes back and forth between Christmas and Thanksgiving to see her in-laws in Birmingham.
Okay.
And so we swapped going to see Stephen, between those two holidays. So this was our Thanksgiving holiday, and it was a really good time. Life is up and down,
Yeah.
and so he struggles with the ups and the downs sometimes, and he's got some mental health issues that are being addressed. But last Christmas, it was just a fiasco. I mean, it was just, no drugs, just crazy stuff. It's like, where is this stuff coming from?
Right.
And I was ready to get up and just say, screw this, I'm leaving.
So you were out there
But this was a year ago.
a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and over Christmas. And so we got it all settled down. We talked with this therapist, and he's in a better spot right now. One of the things that has really been impacting him is he was in so he's had this vintage clothing shop
Oh,
in
wow.
San Diego that's been pretty successful, probably for maybe 5 years.
Okay.
Pacific Beach, in a million years, I would have never thought he was going to make a dime on this thing, but he's doing pretty good with it. But then the building that he was leasing was sold, and the owner was going to do something else with it. So he had to close up his shop, sell a lot of his inventory, and then try to figure out what he was going to do next. And so he had about a 4 or 5 month hiatus there,
Okay.
and he struggled through that. I think that started, knowing that the shop was up, or the building was up for sale, probably last Christmas. And so, anyway, this time, my wife Karen and I were talking. It's like 180 degrees, John.
Oh,
Different.
wow.
He was just so much better, and he's in a new shop now, which he knew about and was complaining about. I said, well, why don't you go try it out? Just do a month-to-month lease and see if that works. Oh, I don't want to do this, don't want to do that. He's in there now for about 2 months, and it's turned out to be a pretty good thing so
Wow.
far.
Does his store have an online presence?
Sort of. He needs to. I get too involved with his life. You got some great stuff here. You've got a great reputation, not just in San Diego, but internationally. He gets, recognition I mean, internationally that I would have never expected. Said you need to, try to do some more stuff with some technology and all. And so, we'll see how that goes. He's got some pretty good friends that are good with technology, and I may try to see if I can subtly encourage him a little bit more. But there's just, this is how he's going to make his living, I think, and I hope it is something that he can leverage and continue to grow and to be happy with. And it's amazing how something like this impacts his disposition, and particularly when he was in his early recovery stages,
Sure.
how it was really a boost for that.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
I think it's about purpose. Having purpose is so important.
Without a doubt, I can
Yeah.
tell you after retiring after 45 years,
Yeah.
purpose is pretty important. What am I
Yeah. Yes. Well, that is so interesting, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today because you and I have never really sat down and had a real in-depth conversation. I know you've been so gracious to come to the immersion week, and I've heard your story, but I'm looking forward to kind of asking some questions and also hearing about the birth of AAG, because if I'm to understand it correctly, you were kind of this is kind of your brainchild.
Well, I don't want to steal any of Tom's thunder.
Okay.
So I'll be sure. We need to be sure to give him a lot of credit too. To be honest, it was kind of my idea to get something going here in Atlanta locally, but it was Tom's drive, determination, and really his connections that he has, not just within the city of Atlanta, but across the country. Um, I think that really made it happen. Uh, so yeah, I'm happy to share all that. And if I say something that I decide maybe was too disparaging of a remark about somebody else, we'll make sure we get it cut out
We'll
right.
just cut it out. We'll cut it right out. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, well, maybe we can start there and then travel back in time because I know that it was born out of your own experience. I went back and watched um, the clip from the Your Fantastic Mind video from 2023, where you and Karen were interviewed by Jay Watson,
Uh,
um, and was just kind of reminded of the challenges that you all faced getting Stephen into treatment, and then ultimately him going to California to Hazelden Betty Ford. And I'm assuming that kind of in the aftermath of that, that's where the idea came that, gosh, I wish people had access to these types of services here in Atlanta. Is that a correct assumption?
yeah, you're spot on. That was our issue: is why do we have to send our child 4,000 or 5,000 miles away in a city that's got some of the best healthcare
Right.
of any city in the country. We just had a big blind spot there, I think.
So where do you even begin? I mean, so you have, I mean, Tom Johnson, right? And Tom is, as you mentioned, very well connected. So is he a friend of yours? Did you just think, oh, I'm going to reach out to Tom, or how did it kind of get rolling?
You know, so I had a long career at Mohawk Industries, and then finished the last 15 or 16 years as CFO there. And it was kind of in the middle of that, tenure at that company that Stephen um, started his decline, and we began to learn about his addiction. And as I drew near to retirement, Stephen had been in recovery, maybe for at that point 3 or 4 years. Early recovery, 3 or 4 years, as you probably know, is still can be pretty bumpy.
Sure.
But he was in recovery and sober, and I had been very active in the business community in Atlanta and had made some pretty good connections, I think, across different businesses in the Atlanta business community. And, I thought, well, I'd like to, have some sort of legacy. What is my legacy going to be, and what's important to me now, in terms of priorities, family, what I'm going to do after I retire. It's probably a couple of years away from retirement at that time. And I knew that my connections that I had made, excuse me for just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that the connections that I had made over time after I retired would kind of dwindle away. And I wouldn't have the opportunity to reach out to people in the business community to try and establish some sort of presence in the Atlanta healthcare community for addiction treatment. And so I started going to different business leaders that I had developed a relationship with over the years and discussing, my situation, my son's situation with them, and then, explaining to them what, my wife Karen and I would like to do, to establish some sort of to improve and increase, let's say, the presence in Atlanta of addiction treatment.
Okay.
And so, I was bouncing around over the course of 6 months between different people. And finally, I went to Larry Gellerstadt, who was a very prominent individual within the Atlanta business community and within the Atlanta community at large. And he said, he and I had a really good conversation. He was very thoughtful about, what I was saying, and had shared some, similar situations in his life that he had experienced, and said, and I'll never forget this, John. It was early January. We were sitting in his boardroom. He was a CEO of a publicly traded company. I was a CFO of a publicly traded company. End of year, you've got all kinds of things going on. And the big kind of grand finale is the earnings release and earnings call that you do with investors. And so that is, for most public companies, it consumes a tremendous amount of time during that first, 4, 5, 6 weeks of a year. And so we had that going on, and we're sitting there in this conference room, the sun's shining in, January, cold outside, but it just felt so kind of good being in there and having this kind of intimate conversation. And he said, "You know what? I'm gonna give you somebody's name, and I want you to go and see him." He said, "Tom Johnson. I'd like you to go and talk to Tom." I said, "Well, I didn't know Tom. I didn't know who he was or what he had done." And I said, "Well, who is Tom? And has he been involved in the addiction field?" He said, "No, just go talk to him." And so I reached out to Tom, or actually, Larry sent an email and introduced Tom to me. And then Tom and I set up a meeting at a restaurant here in Atlanta, the OK Cafe. And it was like a 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning meeting. And I just explained to him, I described the experience with Stephen and how difficult it was and traumatic it was for our whole family. And particularly in the early stages. And then the hope that we had after we learned and developed a better understanding of addiction, particularly with our first trip to Betty Ford. And then with Stephen's sobriety, he was using buprenorphine at that time and had been sober for several years. And so I was going through a long description of our journey there with Tom. And I didn't know, but Tom has a history. He's a former CEO of CNN, and started his career in the OBJ administration, um, and has had a very illustrious and impressive career. But he's always been about helping other people while he was working, and particularly now since he's retired.
Hmm.
And my story, and Stephen's story, and my wife Karen's story resonated with Tom. And Tom, he's like, oh, I've got too much going on, and I don't know if I can do anything, but, let me give it some thought. And, you know, uh, over the course of, um, I can't remember all the details and the time frame and all, but I'd say over the course of the next 5 or 6 months, Tom and I went to a number of meetings with different business and civic leaders and healthcare leaders within the Atlanta community, and just trying to gauge the interest and to stir up some interest
Sure.
throughout the community. And Tom's idea had a dinner at Cherokee Town and Country Club, and Tom invited a number of different business leaders, civic leaders, leaders in the healthcare industry, um, political leaders from both sides of the aisle. I mean, it was a well balanced and a well thought out group of people that he brought together. It must have been 40 or 50 people there.
I've heard about this meeting.
And I shared my story, our story about Stephen. My wife was there with me, and um, then at the time, Karen and I had supported an initiative between Hazleton Betty Ford and Grady Hospital, where the emergency department there had started an initiative to treat, primarily indigent homeless people coming in that were addicted to opioids with this buprenorphine.
Okay.
And so they were just kind of doing it on their own without much training. And so Karen and I agreed to set up a program where Hazleton would spend time down here with the group, educating them about the process, the back office, and just best practices for dealing with opioid addiction. And then they spent some time up in Minnesota with the group as well. And so we had a couple of doctors from Grady that we had worked with in that initiative that turned out to be a pretty successful initiative that also came to describe, their situation, what was going on, and also, talked about the need for more and better addiction treatment in Atlanta. And so that was kind of the start of it. And, it took, Tom came up with the idea of putting Emory together with Hazleton Betty Ford. He knew the Hazleton group from years back. He knew a lot of the major players in Emory healthcare, particularly on the mental health side.
Okay.
And so, we were able to get the ball rolling there. Took a few years to get everything up and running, but you had two large, successful organizations, and each of the organizations kind of had their own way of running their businesses. And so there was some, kind of back and forth with all that, and some regulatory issues that we had to go through. But we got it up and running, and the rest is history right now. I mean, it's you guys are doing a phenomenal job right now, phenomenal job with what you're doing, not just with treatment, but with research and with education and things like this. I wish we'd had this, here in Atlanta. When Stephen first told us about his addiction in 2010.
It's so funny. I'm trying to think of what year, because so what you're talking about was probably around 2020, around COVID, or maybe even before and after that kind of period of time.
Well, it lapped. It was we started. I think I started talking to Tom in 2017, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, or maybe it could have been 18. Uh, it was either 17 or 18. And then it took the next, 3 or so years to get everybody together on the same page. And then I think it must have been January of 2020, we kind of had a kickoff meeting. Um, and I guess it was at Cherokee as well. And we invited a much larger group of people. Tom invited a much larger group of people, and everybody was very excited about it. And there were a number of us up on the podium talking. Justine was there, and there were a number of people in the addiction treatment side of the business. William Warriors was there. He was one of the lead speakers, and so it was really everybody was just like charged up and ready to go. And then the pandemic hit. It's like, oh man, and I went back to I at that point I was retired and I went back to work in
Really?
2020. Yeah, because I had, long story short, the guy that succeeded me didn't work out, and so I agreed to go back for a year.
Okay.
And so we had the pandemic going. I'm back at work. Tom's mad at me for going back to work. I said, I'm just trying to make a living, Tom. And I remember just having all of these online, meetings, and it was that really, really did throw a wrench into the whole thing. And so, but here we are, 5 years later, and things are really running great.
Tom is like a dog with a bone. And once you put that bone in his mouth, it was over. Because I mean, I've been around Tom now for since 2023,
Yeah,
and he is just he's a juggernaut. I mean,
he
really.
is. He's a real plus for the Atlanta community. I
Yeah,
don't wonder how many people really recognize that and the
right.
things he's done here, not just in Atlanta, but across the country.
Yeah. Yeah, I was sitting in my living room beginning of 2022. I think y'all were you had started construction on
Yeah,
the Clifton Road address. So at the time, the all of the addiction services were at EP 12, Executive Park 12,
yeah,
housed within the outpatient um, part of the general psych. So, and I don't know, Justine would know more of. She may have been the only addiction psychiatrist there at the time. I'm not sure. But I'm sitting on my couch. I don't even know what I was doing, but I came across the Addiction Alliance of Georgia website.
yeah,
And I remember seeing this collaboration between Emory and Hazelden Betty Ford, two names that I knew very well and knew were highly revered in the addiction treatment and healthcare arena. And I was like, man, and I was happy doing what I was doing, but I was like, this is an amazing opportunity. And it's funny because up until that point, my experience, my career was in residential treatment.
yeah,
And what drew me to the website was they had the phases laid out. And then I guess it was phase 2 was the residential treatment component. And I was drawn to that. And I sent an email and ended up getting connected with Justine. And I came up there for a visit. And like you said, the rest is history.
yeah.
It's it's amazing how things just kind of turn out.
I wish I'd known. I wish Justine had been around and AAG had been around back in 2010 when we first took Stephen to the Emory emergency room.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We found out about Stephen's addiction in December of 2010. He was home from college, and there were some issues with some financial issues that I had just kind of figured out with Stephen early one morning. Um, so it must have been over the Christmas holidays. I was at home. Stephen was at home downstairs with some of his buddies in the basement. And, you know, I went down and I asked him, I think I woke him up. I said, what's going on here? We have, help me understand what's going on here. Are you having issues, financial issues? And he said, well, Dad, I need to tell you, I'm addicted to opioids. And I was like, well, I don't know what that means. Opioids, didn't sound that bad. Opioids. I knew heroin. I knew, cocaine and, all the names that, had been around for so long, but I didn't understand what it meant when he said he was addicted to opioids. Maybe he's just taking some pills or something. Not a big deal. And anyway, we took him, we called, um, I called two different people that, I felt pretty close to. And at that time, I didn't know much about addiction. I was very hesitant about talking out loud about it.
Sure.
And so I called a gentleman that led the HR group at Mohawk and told him about the situation and asked him what to do. And he recommended Emory emergency room. And then I called a gentleman, a minister at our church at Peachtree Road Methodist, and just, told him what was happening and asked him, what his advice was. And so that's how we ended up in the emergency room there at Emory. But Stephen was over 18 and, or whatever the age was that, he was legal, and the physician couldn't tell us anything other than he was addicted to opioids. I think that's what he told us. And I said, well, we tried to get more information. It was difficult to get any more information. And we said, well, what do we do? And he said, well, you can take him home and, let him go through all of the issues at home, or we can put him in the psych ward. And, Stephen was like, I'm not going to go in the psych ward.
Right.
And so that was it. I mean, we thought we'll just take him home and, he's got maybe he's got like the flu or something. And we didn't really understand and realize, how difficult withdrawal is and how important detox is. And Karen would tell you the story. She could tell you over, more than an hour how hard it was staying up with Stephen and him going through all of the issues, that you go through there. And then, it was like, what's next? What do we do next with all this? And, my and my wife's biggest issues, the biggest issue was understanding the disease and that it was a disease, and understanding the need to talk to people about it, and understanding that it's not all our fault.
Right.
And it, took a long time to, get through all that. I still sometimes today think about, well, what if I'd done this or that different, But, I can remember, somebody finally said, well, early in the process, somebody said, we had a psychiatrist that was, or a psychologist that was recommended to us in the early phases. And he told us, you guys, Karen and Frank, you need to go to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon or some sort of 12-step meetings for loved ones of addicts. And it took a while to find a group that we liked, and we each found different groups. But through those groups, we each learned to start talking to other people about it. And I think that was like, the first big step, important step that we took. Um, and so that process went on for 3 or 4 years, maybe. We both ended up, my wife and I both ended up going to therapy ourselves, and just it's a lot about just okay, this is what it is. I didn't do it. It's a disease. It can be treated. There is hope, but it requires work on everybody's part, and a lot of the work is hard. If you're used to having certain kind of relationships with family members, that aren't healthy. And so there was a lot of hard work that we all did and continue to do. And so, Stephen, we went to that first psychologist, and that didn't work out. He didn't connect, and neither did we. And so then we ended up, I can't remember all of the different rehabs that he went into, but it must have been over the course of, 7 or 8 years. I bet he went to 8 or 10 different rehabs.
Really?
Yeah, only twice was he in residential, but the first one or two were here in Atlanta, and he relapsed in a bad way here in Atlanta, and it was in that relapse that we learned that he was using heroin, and he was using it intravenously.
Wow.
And so, that really, really, really set us back, my wife and I. And the counselor at the outpatient facility that he was going to at the time called and said, "You guys really need to talk to Stephen. Here's what's happening." And, we were just blown away by that. Didn't know what to do. And she said, "Well, you need to put him in residential." And we said, "What if he doesn't want to go?" Well, then you need to, cut him off. And so we struggled with that. My daughter had just been married for a few months, and we went through some, meetings, and the counselor there at the rehab facility was trying to explain the process, to us of, kind of the intervention process. And so we called Stephen. So he, I can't remember all the details, but we couldn't. I don't know why we called and didn't meet him in person, but we did. Myself, my wife, my daughter, and her new husband, and then the counselor. And we said, "Look, Stephen, you're either going to have to go into rehab, uh, residential rehab, or we're just going to have to cut you off." And we were able to get him to go up to a facility in Memphis, I think. And at the time, he had a girlfriend that he met in the 12-step meetings that he was going to, who was also a heroin addict. And so he didn't want to go, but he did. And I don't know, he was up there maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And, we'd get these, every twice a week kind of calls from his counselors there about how he was doing. Some were good, some were not so good. And then she started expressing concern to the counselor about his girlfriend. And Stephen called and said, he didn't think he needed to stay any longer, and that he was leaving. Yeah, so this is actually, it's coming back to me now. This is where we did the intervention, and so we got on the phone with him, the lady that we knew from the outpatient place, and then our daughter and her husband, and we told Stephen at that point, you are going to need to, if if you leave that facility, you're not going to be able to come back to our house. And we're going to take away your car, we're going to take away your phone, and you're just on your own. And so his girlfriend came and picked him up, and I don't know, in between, living out under the bridges, under highways, in Atlanta, and then with his girlfriend, um, I don't know how long that was, 2, 3, 4 months, and some back and forth with us, about what he would have to do to come back home. And what we told him was that, excuse me for 1 minute, I need to turn this off. What we told him was that, we're not going to be able to kind of, you have got to go back into a residential treatment program.
Right.
We had 3 different facilities. One was Betty Ford. They'd not merged with Hazleton yet, out on the West Coast. And we said that, in order to get back, where we're supporting you with car, money, and phones, you're going to have to go and spend whatever amount of time they think it's necessary for you to have a good recovery. And we went back and forth on that with him for it felt like forever. Maybe it was 6 weeks or so. And we were really at a low point. Didn't know if we were going to get a phone call that he's in the hospital, or he's died from an overdose. You go to bed every night worrying about it. And over the course of Stephen's teenage years, we get a lot of phone calls, 12, 1, 2 o'clock at night, before he even realized he was suffering from addiction. And so that was like for both of us kind of our biggest fear, getting that phone call, particularly at that time. And he negotiated with us, well, what about if I go to this addiction treatment or that addiction treatment? And, we'd run it up the flagpole with, the person that was helping us, and they said, nope, it's got to be one of these 3. And so we stuck to our guns. Me, Karen, and I, she found out about an event that Betty Ford hosted every, couple, 3 months, where they had the loved ones from people that are addicts come in to their facility out in Palm Springs. And they would the loved ones and the addict kind of start rebuilding their relationships through a week of a pretty intensive kind of encounters between them. And they also would invite people like Karen and myself that still had someone that was out, living in active addiction, so that would help us. Because, like I said early on, it was a big part of our journey is us getting to the point where we realized it wasn't our fault. We needed to talk about it. It's a disease. And so that, I would say, John, that 1 week that we spent out there, I was reluctant to go. I was just something going on at work, and I was like, I can't do it. And I'm glad I did. She convinced me, and it was the best experience, one of the best experiences we've ever had. Probably because it just offered so much hope. These were people at that time, Betty Ford. We knew Betty Ford. The reputation, growing up at our age, Johnny Carson on the Tonight Show used to joke about it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That it had a great brand recognition, and so we knew, and so went out there, and they talked about and had people that were in recovery come and talk to us, talked about the disease, helped us understand alternatives, and that there was hope, and it just we left that event with a tremendous amount of hope, and we were so Betty Ford had a campus that was gated and had a guard house to get in and out of the facility of the campus. And so and they required you to leave your phones in the car. And so at the end of every day, you'd get in the car, you'd catch up on your phone mail, go back to the hotel, and then start all over again the next day. The last day there, Friday, we got in our car. Karen opened up her phone, said, "Oh, I've got a message from Stephen." And I don't even think we had left the campus yet. We were in the car driving, and she called him, and he said, "Mom, I've decided to come to Betty Ford."
What? Did he know y'all were there?
I can't remember. He may have, he was in such a bad way, but even if we had told him, he might not have remembered. But that he knew that was one of the ones that probably was the one at that point that we had said this is our top list, top of the list. Right. And so it was just a real emotional time for us. And so we flew back. No direct flights at that time from Atlanta to Palm Springs. I need to get back to work. Karen got in. Stephen at the time was living with his girlfriend. It was in active addiction. And they were living in an apartment. And he said, "Dad, in order for me, I can't leave here with her, knowing that I'm leaving." He was afraid of, just, I don't know, there's a lot of things he was afraid of. And I said, "Okay, well, why don't we make a plan, and I'll help you leave. You meet me somewhere, carry whatever you can, and get in the car, and we'll go." And that was another memorable time. He was looking over his shoulders the whole time. We were, I think, in the parking deck of this apartment complex where she lived, and he had a couple of grocery bags with his clothes in it, and looking for somebody to come and hit him over the head or something.
Really?
I don't know. I don't. I think all that was just stuff going on in his head, but it frightened me. And so we got him in the car, and we Karen the next day. So this was all within a couple of days of getting back from Betty Ford. Got on a plane, and she could describe, the the emotional roller coaster of riding on those planes with Stephen. The first big concern was the first stop, may have been Salt Lake, and he got off the plane and said, "I need to go smoke a cigarette." She said, "Okay." And then they started, the announcements for everybody back on the plane. It's about to take off, and no Stephen. And so, like in the last 5 minutes, he comes rushing in, got on the plane. And then when they got to Palm Springs, there's a van that comes around, I guess, to the airport and picks people up. And so these were people that, addicted to alcohol, for example, and then just before they could go, they just had to get as drunk as they could. And it was just
What a scene.
difficult. Yeah, difficult. I mean, you can kind of laugh about it now.
You have to.
When they got to Betty Ford, for checking in, one person was running around, "I'm not going in, I'm not going in." Karen said Stephen's just sitting there looking like, "What the hell am I getting into?" And so, he went, got in. He was there 7 months.
7 months.
Months. They had like a really intensive where he detoxes and stays for the first couple of weeks, and then they had something that was a lower level, next level down, where he had a roommate. He wasn't confined, and then I can't remember the name of it, but it was like sober living.
Sober living, yeah.
But it was the complex. It was part of the Betty Ford complex. It was not in the hospital area. It was a small group of homes all close together in a neighborhood. And between going in, detoxing, and going all the way through the sober living, it was 7 months. And at that time, he's done. He looks really really good. I have a photo of Stephen and myself shortly after that, and I mean, he would just look so good, and had this big smile. And, it really was a very heartwarming experience. And then we had to find a place for him to live. So it was transitioning to another sober living. And we decided, San Diego is probably the best place because it didn't make sense for him to come back to Atlanta. And we were being advised, not to do that, at least,
Sure.
for the first couple of years. And so Mohawk had a facility out in San Diego. Um, and so and then we got some names of some sober living places out there. And so we found a place for him to live. He started working at Mohawk, and you know, uh, that worked out um, for a while. I don't think he relapsed in sober living, but as soon as whatever the time frame was, they had decided for him to be in sober living. As soon as he found a roommate, a sober roommate, um, I would say within, I don't know, 8 weeks, the roommate was kicking him out
Oh no.
because he had relapsed. And so, we're trying to find, an outpatient um, program for him there in San Diego. We did. Uh, it was a long and arduous process. And I'll tell you what was another big turning point was, he probably had a couple or maybe even three relapses, including the one, that first one I described when he moved in with a sober roommate in San Diego. But we spoke with a doctor who at the time was working for Hazelton Betty Ford. And this must have been around 2015 or 14, maybe. And he mentioned buprenorphine.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're like, well, what is that? How does it work? And, you know, he said, it's a real, still controversial. Not many physicians that are prescribing it right now. The way he described the medication to me, it's like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you do that?
Right.
And um, so, Stephen tried Suboxone before that, shot once a month, I think.
Yep.
And that didn't work. And so then this buprenorphine was something we thought we'd try. And he was in San Diego. He had a therapist, psychologist that he had just started seeing, that he's still seeing today.
Oh wow.
Uh, I said, Doctor A, you know, where do we find this medication? He said, I don't know. Do to him. And he worked with addicts. And so then he found a psychiatrist that he worked with, and I talked to her, and she said, well, I don't know anything about it, but I'll give it a shot.
Wow.
Um, you know, we finally um, got him started on buprenorphine, and he probably relapsed. I can't remember for sure, once or twice after that. Um, but when I step back and look at it, and, you know, ask myself, what is it that really got him to turn the corner there? And um, I think it was several things. One, um, he started, um, he was taking buprenorphine. Two, he started this business that I mentioned early on, this vintage clothing business that I was very skeptical of. And it was something that turned into a success for him. And three, he met a lady, um, and she's was completely sober, and they connected and got married. And she actually had a finance accounting background, and so even though she was still had her own job, she was able to help Stephen on that side of his business. And so I think it was those three things um, kind of together that helped uh, really support and bolster him in those early recovery years. He's divorced the lady since then, and he's got a new girlfriend that he's been with for probably 3 years now. And he's no longer, he's weaned himself off of buprenorphine. That was another thing. Nobody knew anything about, how does that work?
Right.
Um, and he he looked it up online, and because he decided that he didn't like the side effects. He'd been on it for several years. And I can remember talking to different psychiatrists about it. They were like, I don't know if I would do that. I would keep taking it. But he's been off of it now for 5 years, 3, 4, 5 years.
I didn't realize that.
And so, you know, it was, when you think back, as I'm going through trying to remember and talk about it now, I just, you kind of take those experiences and put them away. And, they were helpful. And, we are very different people now in terms, because we went through that. But boy, some of those experiences were just terrifying. And I'll tell you, I think you've asked me this before, and others too. What would you do different, having gone through what you've gone through, if you knew then what you know now? And I think every parent says, "Well, I could have done this or I could have done that" when they were in grammar school or middle school or high school. So there was some of that, and but I think probably the biggest thing, one thing, if I could have done it the way I wanted to do it, I would have, ideally had a residential treatment program of the same caliber of the Hazleton Betty Ford programs here in Atlanta. That, we could just go out and drive 30, 45 minutes to get to the facility. Those didn't exist at that time, in my view. And I couldn't get anybody that would give me a recommendation that, I felt comfortable with. But the other thing is, you hear a lot, you have to let them hit bottom. But, knowing what I know about relapse and, the high likelihood of people overdosing and dying,
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that. That's hitting bottom. That's a bad situation for an opioid addict. And I can't tell you, John, how many funerals we've been to over the last 10 years. His girlfriend that I described to you, she was so smart. She graduated from Georgia Tech, had a great job. After Stephen moved out to San Diego, and it was pretty early in his recovery, but she died and came back to the funeral there. Stephen has had several of his close friends from high school that I remember died. We had a young man that Stephen played football with, and Jordan Dickerson. I'll just never forget. He was such a good kid. He went to church with us as well, and he and Stephen were in the same grade, and we're both in our confirmation class. And I remember thinking, "This is such a good kid," and he got hung up in all that stuff, and going to his funeral was really, really hard. So I wouldn't. My personal opinion is I wouldn't let it hit bottom. Yeah. I think, I'm guessing that there are not many people that would recommend that, at this point. But that's something I would for sure do differently.
Yeah, and I think that is exactly kind of the mentality among a lot of treatment providers 15, maybe even 10 years ago. But you're right, the stakes are different today.
Yeah.
It's far more dangerous, because people can die. And there's pressed pills, there's fentanyl and carfentanil, and there's all kinds of things you can get online. It's a whole different ball game. And you described two really powerful moments that I think for a family member is something that probably we all experience at one point in time, which is that moment where you've been given the counsel to cut him off if he doesn't, essentially take the option of going to treatment and having to have that conversation. I can only imagine how difficult that must be. But then number two, this idea of waiting for a phone call, and he's out homeless. You don't know where he is, and this idea of getting a phone call. It's got to be unbelievably difficult as a parent to go through that. My kids are young, and just the thought of that is terrifying to me. That could be, my fate. And I put my parents through that for many, many years. And so, wow. How does Stephen feel about the advocacy work that you do now? Because you are, someone who's not afraid to share your story. You're someone who's been very public as far as your advocacy, not only in the community, the business community, at your church. Um, what are his kind of feelings about it?
He supports it. I think uh, he is proud that we're taking that initiative and trying to do something. Um, he's trying to do things in a smaller way there in San Diego with Narcan.
Hmm.
He's had people come into his shops that I think he's had one or two that have come in that have overdosed, and so he's actually talked to me about that. And when we were first working with Hazelton, Betty Ford, and Emory, Stephen said, to me, he said, "Dad, you need to make sure that whatever it is you guys get up and running, that they they address the problem with the indigent community as well." He said, because I was once there,
Yeah.
and um, you know, it's something uh, that can cause people to kind of take that turn in their life and live out on the streets. So I think he's was a pretty big supporter of it, still is.
I'm sure it meant the world to him that the two of you took such an interest, and you know, because I'm sure it's validating to him,
Yeah,
to see that the two of you recognize the severity of it and the importance of the issue, and to be willing to go because, to your point, you go back to December of 2010, and there was this feeling of, I don't want people to know about this. There's a lot of shame, right? And a lot of fear of, well, what kind of repercussions might there be, or these kinds of things. And for the two of you to kind of walk through that, I think is courageous. And I'm sure, I know I would, if I saw my parents doing that, I would think, wow, it would be meaningful. So I would imagine it's meaningful to him.
yeah, I think so. He's a good guy, and he's really trying to, you know, make a life for him now, and recognizes that that part of his life was a mistake, and but also that it's an illness, and that he's. I think he's in a good spot with all that right now, both with himself um, and with his parents and the rest of his family. Um, so, you know, I feel really good about where we are. That's not to say that we don't still have disagreements and issues that come up, which is a normal part of family life.
Right.
Um, but boy, it's a lot better than it was 15 years ago.
Oh man. Yeah, it's funny. I've been watching the show Stranger Things. I don't know if you've watched this show, but it takes place in the 80s, and they wear a lot of vintage shirts in this show. And I was watching and I saw, wow, these shirts are so cool. I actually went online, this was like a week ago, and I ordered a vintage movie shirt.
Yeah.
And I was looking and like thinking, oh, this would be some good kind of Christmas stuff. So you tell your son I'm in the market. All right. And he needs to get that online presence going because I'll give him some business. Does he have
Yeah. There you
does he
go.
have movie shirts? Like, does he have like old rock bands and old movies, or am I thinking a different kind of
He's
vintage?
got oh, shoot, he's got old rock bands, movies, just all kinds of memorabilia, in terms of T-shirts, and not just T-shirts, but he's got other, pants, boots, hats, and so he's, big leather jackets. It's an interesting business. He gets some strange characters that come into that shop of his.
I bet.
Uh,
I
his
bet.
his therapist described his shop as the you remember the bar in Star Wars with all
Yes.
the crazy characters, and that can go either way sometimes. But he is that's what he enjoys doing, and he's just really I'm really proud of what he's accomplished, and the idea. I'll never forget. We were out in San Diego in his condo, and he said, "Dad, he was still working at our Mohawk facility there. I've decided I want to go into retail clothing." I said, "You do? Tell me how that's going to work." And so, those clothing racks in department stores, they wheel around the store.
Yes.
He had one of these like 5 foot long clothing racks, and he wheels it out, and there's all these T-shirts, old blue jeans. And I thought, Stephen, how much does it cost for you to live a month? And how many of those can you sell? I didn't understand the business. I mean, the margin, he goes and he pays, 50 cents for a t-shirt and sells it for, $5, $10. So the margin is huge on that. And
Yeah.
you just have to know, what products to buy, what products going to sell, and then have some sort of salesmanship, ability. He's able to do all that.
So my last question for you, because I know we're out of time, but if I were to go into your closet, would I see some vintage shirts? And if so, what kind of vintage shirts would I see? Because I can't imagine you always dressed so nicely wearing a vintage shirt. Are there any in there?
So you know the answer. There are no there. Yeah, there's a vintage shirt or two that goes back 5 years. Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, I may have one or two tucked away somewhere in the drawer somewhere. I have to go check just to confirm what I'm telling you, but yeah, nothing that I'm aware of.
That is too funny. Well, I cannot thank you enough for joining me and sharing your story. It's been a pleasure, uh, and I just am so grateful for all the work that you and Tom and we didn't even mention Jack because I know Jack came on board too and has played a essential role at getting the Addiction Alliance going, and so
Yeah,
it is
Jack Harden was a big part of that. I mean, as you know, he's his own personal initiative is
right.
homelessness. Of course, he sees a lot of addiction there, and he's really helped. What I told you, Stephen had said. Take care of the indigent. He's
Right.
really helped push that. And Jack, he's in terms of his connections within the philanthropic community, they're pretty strong. And I don't remember how old he is, but he's still working at the law firm, primarily supporting those kinds of projects.
Wow.
And so he's been quite a force in our community here.
Such a nice guy. When I started working at AAG, I met him and he was so gracious. So you as well, Tom. I mean, all of you have been so kind and humble. And it's just, yeah, it's been so refreshing to see. And it's also refreshing in my experience, the support in the community for the types of services that are being offered. People really seem to be welcoming and open to what we're doing. And I think that's very refreshing and hopefully a sign of more to come.
Yeah, I agree. I know we're out of time, but I'll just make one more comment. So we're right across the street from the High Museum here.
Okay.
We've moved to one level living, and the lady that's running that complex, Woodruff Arts Complex, Ella Monomog, was someone I met back when she was running the Atlanta Metro Chamber of Commerce. And I explained to her at that point, and we had just started the initiative with Tom, and just told her what I was trying to do to try to get her to point me in the right direction. And so now she's here, and I saw her not too long ago, and she said, Frank, I told her how things are going, and I don't think she had met Justine Welch, but um, she said, "Can you connect me with someone um, there at the Addiction Alliance? Because we are taking on an initiative here at the Arts Center uh, where we think that there's evidence that getting children at an early age involved in the arts is something that can help with prevention of drug and alcohol addiction. And several of the artistic directors there at the theater and at the museum also supported it. So I said, sure, I'm happy to, get you guys connected. And so they have since, Justine and Hala have since connected. And the people over at the Art Center are really excited about it. I think Justine is excited about it too, but she's got so many irons in the fire. She sometimes looks at me and, "What did you get me into this time?" But it's another opportunity, right, to address the issue from a different front.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I mean, it has been overwhelmingly positive on my end, reaching out to a lot of academic institutions, a lot of program directors and deans, and trying to empower and educate the future workforce, healthcare workforce, and across the board, they have been welcoming and disseminated information to their students, and the students. You've seen it at the immersion program. I mean, these students, it's 100% voluntary, and they're taking. Some of them are coming over their spring break. It's like, wow. When I was that age, I wasn't doing that on my spring break. I can tell
Well,
you that. But
I want to make one more point too.
yes,
I'm an alum at Georgia State University and on the foundation board there, and have been. That's another area where we've tried to support addiction treatment and recovery and education at that university. And are you familiar with CRCs?
yes,
And
yes.
so I've wanted to start a CRC out there for years and worked with the people up the street here at another university that's been very successful with it. And I've just, continued to hit brick walls until about a year ago. And today, for the last 6, 9 months, we've had a CRC up and running with brand new area that they can meet in. Um, it was really exciting. And I don't remember the numbers, but, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it was like 3 or 4 people. And now it's, 20, 30, 40, 50 people
Yeah,
and growing. So, it's those kinds of things, education, if you can get to people when they're very young and work with them like they are with Woodruff, or to kids that are in high school or college that are kind of at that stage where they could go in the wrong direction, and provide them with the education and the support. Think how much money, just think about it from a financial standpoint, how much money we would save
yeah,
um, when people go into active addiction. And think of how many lives would be so different
right.
if people didn't go into active addiction, not just the addicts, but the families.
It's immeasurable
Yeah, it
because
is.
the ripple effect
Yeah.
is so large that it would, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Frank, thank you so much. Thank you for your
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it and have enjoyed working with you and look forward to seeing you again.
Absolutely. And I'm going to hit you up for the immersion program. So you have to be waiting for my call.
Yes, sir. With bated breath.
Bye, Frank.
See you later.